From Canada, America, and Mexico merging together to make the North American Union, to the Asian and European unions, clearly what we're seeing is the globalization of the world's nations to make one. I'll steal the slogan from George Bush Sr., who announced on September 11, 1991, the beginning of the New World Order.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order. A world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders.
How can this happen, and what's their agenda to make this all happen? But a more important question, how or why have we allowed this to all happen? Obviously, there's a select 1% of people that own and control just about everything. Now, we can't go over this entire history about totalitarianism, but we will go over the clear facts that will leave the biggest skeptic in shock. Benjamin Franklin warned that if we give away our liberty for security, we actually end up losing both. And 10 years to the day after the attacks on the World Trade Center on September 11th, 2001, that's exactly what we did. We traded our liberty for our security, and that's why we are where we are today. From the invasive, unconstitutional group known as the TSA, the Criminal Federal Reserve and IRS, to the rising awareness of a totalitarian police state, to Agenda 21 and the government's attacks on our freedom of speech and right to bear arms. And I know I'm leaving a lot out, but clearly our government has a bias, and is biased against liberty, which I know can be hard to believe. The Bible warns us about a one-world government, and that the Antichrist will rule over this one-world government, proclaiming to be God.
Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he, as God, sitteth in the temple of God, shewing himself that he is God. Remember ye not that when I was yet with you, I told you these things? And now ye know what withholdeth that he might be revealed in this time.
So, to better understand these outrageous claims, let's take a look into see what communism is all about by looking into the Communist Manifesto, which was written by Karl Marx. First and foremost, you'll see that in the Communist Manifesto that, ironically enough, it's dedicated to Charles Darwin. That being said, the belief of evolution is huge for communists because it provides an alternative to there being an all-knowing creator of the universe. The first point of the Communist Manifesto is the abolition of private property. One thing our founding fathers knew was that owning property is essential to being free. If you pay rent, in actuality, you're a slave. Think about it. The original slogan of the founding fathers was life, liberty, and property. This is the opposite of what the environmental movement is all about. You want to cut down a tree? Well, you're going to need a permit for that. It really boils down to the belief of evolution. The belief that animals and trees have equal rights with humans. The second point of Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto is a heavy progressive or graduated income tax. The IRS has proven itself to be a corrupt, unlawful, and unable to be transparent. Meanwhile, the American citizens better not make one single mistake on their tax return forms. World-renowned pediatric neurosurgeon Dr.Ben spoke on this issue with our commander-in-chief sitting right in front of him, and you would think the president would be a little thankful for his insight. But after the prayer breakfast, Dr. Carson was thanked by becoming a target of the IRS, and was shortly after audited by the IRS. Here's what the controversy was all about. See for yourself.
What about our taxation system? So complex. There is no one who can possibly comply with every jot and tittle of our tax and say, if I wanted to get you or you, I could get you on a tax issue. That doesn't make any sense. What we need to do is come up with something that's simple. And when I pick up my Bible, you know what I see? I see the fairest individual in the universe, God, and he's given us a system. It's called tithe. Now, we don't necessarily have to do it 10%, but it's principle. He didn't say, if your crops fail, don't give me any tithes. He didn't say, if you have a bumper crop, give me triple tithes. So there must be something inherently fair about proportionality. You make $10 billion, you put in $1 billion. You make $10, you put in $1. Of course, you got to get rid of the loopholes. But now some people say, well, that's not fair because it doesn't hurt the guy who made $10 billion as much as the guy who made 10. Where does it say you have to hurt the guy? He just put $1 billion in the pot. We don't need to hurt him. It's that kind of thinking. It's that kind of thinking that has resulted in 602 banks in the Cayman Islands. That money needs to be back here, building our infrastructure and creating jobs. And we're smart enough to figure out how to do that. We've already started down the path of solving one of the other big problems, healthcare. We need to have good healthcare for everybody. It's the most important thing that a person can have. Money means nothing, titles means nothing when you don't have your health. But we got to figure out efficient ways to do it. We spend a lot of money on healthcare, twice as much per capita as anybody else in the world, and yet not very efficient. What can we do? Here's my solution. When a person is born, give them a birth certificate, an electronic medical record, and a health savings account, to which money can be contributed pre-tax from the time you're born to the time you die. When you die, you can pass it on to your family members so that when you're 85 years old and you got 6 diseases, you're not trying to spend up everything. You're happy to pass it on, and there's nobody talking about death panels. That's number one. And also, for the people who are indigent, who don't have any money, we can make contributions to their HSA each month because we already have this huge pot of money. Instead of sending it to some bureaucracy, let's put it in their HSAs. Now they have some control over their own health care. And what do you think they're going to do? They're going to learn very quickly how to be responsible. When Mr. Jones gets that diabetic foot ulcer, he's not going to the emergency room and blowing a big chunk of it. He's going to go to the clinic. He learns that very quickly. Gets the same treatment. In the emergency room, they send him out. In the clinic, they say, now let's get your diabetes under control so you're not back here in 3 weeks with another problem. That's how we begin to solve these kinds of problems. It's much more complex than that, and I don't have time to go into it all, but we can do all of these things because we're smart people.
This agency has not only targeted Christians and conservative groups, but has actually driven this country deeper into debt. Every year, Americans spend around $500 billion in tax compliance. That's nearly the same as our military budget. And all that money is wasted just to make sure that we comply with this tax code, which is bigger and more complex than the Bible. The third point we're going to go over is the confiscation of all property of all immigrants and rebels. The first problem is, who decides who's rebellious and what is it that they're rebelling against? This style of policing is nothing new. While yes, our government has gone over the top lately with this police state, billions of dollars being spent for surveillance and street cameras, not to mention ammunition and war vehicles, so clearly they're preparing for something domestically. And who is it that the government's targeting? That's right, you guessed it. Constitutionalists, gun owners, and evangelical Christians.
You can pull right up to a take enemy fire and still try to address a threat without being fear of getting shot.
So I'm thinking that is totally appropriate in Iraq, but what kind of a situation in the U.S. would you see that happening?
I mean, we've got a lot of constitutionalists and a lot of people that stockpile weapons, a lot of ammunition. I mean, we've got a lot of constitutionalists and a lot of people that stockpile weapons, a lot of ammunition. They have weapons here locally.
Number 4, the centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with state capital and an exclusive monopoly. What we have here in America is a debt-based economy, and that's the job of the Federal Reserve, which is just as federal as Federal Express. But to explain this more in depth, here's a short history lesson from Wayne Paul.
13, the Federal Reserve Act was passed floor of the House where 3 members of Congress were on the floor. At that time, they only needed a majority of votes to pass it. So in 1913, the Federal Reserve Act was passed. 20 years later, 1933, under Roosevelt, the United States was declared bankrupt. And in 1933, the Federal Reserve Private Bank says, okay, USA, what are you going to pledge as collateral on the debt you owe me? What happened by 1936? Does anybody know? We instituted Social Security system, and you and I and our children and our children's children were pledged as collateral on the debt of our government to the Federal Reserve. And that's where we're at today. It took 20 years to make this country bankrupt, and since then, our government has operated under emergency powers of our government. It is not the president that makes the decision in this country. It's the Secretary of Treasury who turns around and is put in there by the Federal Reserve to manage the bankruptcy. We've been in bankruptcy ever since. So to print $700 billion and to give it away, how do they get away with it? The manager of the bankruptcy is told by the Federal Reserve this is the way to go. That's where we're...
Folks, our dollar isn't money. If you look closely on your dollar bill, you'll see that it says, among other demonic symbols, that it's actually a Federal Reserve note, a promissory note. Lawful money is backed up by something, gold or silver. The Federal Reserve has actually destroyed our economy, and central bank was Karl Marx's idea, and that's why it's communism. Let me tell you, the communists rejoiced when the Federal Reserve Act was passed, because now the government can create a recession or a depression whenever they want. And believe me, they have. The government uses the communist ideology of crisis management. They create a problem so that they can be the solution. Rahm Emanuel explains this Marxist/communist ideology quite wonderfully.
Never want a serious crisis to go to waste. And what I mean by that, it's an opportunity to do things that you think you could not do before.
Jesus told his disciples to judge a tree by its fruit. And the reason why we label these past several presidential administrations and the special interests running our economy, the reason why we call them extreme leftists, Marxist, communists, is because of the content of their character, which proves they hold these Marxist, communist ideologies. Some of them make them loud and clear, while others are more subtle about it.
In fact, Congressman Allen West recently told the great one, Mark Levin, that it's, quote, silly to try and work with somebody who he believes is a, quote, Marxist, socialist, rigid ideologue. Here to elaborate on those comments, the man himself, Florida Congressman Colonel Allen West. Colonel, I don't remember that you ever said Marxist, socialist before. Maybe being freed up from Congress has allowed you to say that, or maybe I'm wrong in not hearing it before.
No, I've said that before because I think when you sit down and you look at the policies that have emanated from President Obama, his administration, this entire class warfare rhetoric that we continue to hear is definitely a Marxist theory. When you look at the nationalizing of production, being the healthcare industry, the Dodd-Frank with the financial industry, the automobile industry, what Lisa Jackson and the EPA is doing to the energy sector, and of course the National Labor Relations Board, that's nationalizing production. When you look at the incredible expansion of the welfare nanny state, and all of a sudden this belief of economic fairness, economic patriotism, fairness and fair shot, those are the type of policies and theories that are not consistent with a constitutional republic, definitely not consistent with our founding fathers and the type of people that they read, being Rousseau, Montesquieu, or John Locke. And so when you talk about the arrogance of the president, we reelected someone that went from $10.6 trillion to $16 trillion in debt. We've had 4 straight years of trillion-dollar deficits. We've had an incredible, earth-shattering numbers of Americans in poverty, Americans on food stamps. We've seen a 32% increase in welfare spending. We've seen gas prices being exorbitantly high. So he has every right to be arrogant and feel that he is never going to be held responsible.
With all of this being said, and with all of these atrocities that have been exposed, what is our solution? I would suggest to you to approach this in a Christian manner, understanding that these politicians are not the enemy. They might work for the enemy, but they're still on this side of eternity and are in need of a Savior just like anyone else. The Bible says in 2 Chronicles 7:14 that if my people, which are called by my name, shall humble themselves and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and will heal their land. Clearly, our answer isn't to brush this under the rug, but to audit these government agencies, see who the criminals really are, and abolish what the government doesn't need control over. Now, we need to admit what and where we went wrong, and begin correcting the mistakes. Now, I agree with the skeptics out there, and that's a lot easier said than done. But it's the exact same thing we all need to do to get right with the Lord. The Bible describes God as a holy and just God, that He will judge the world in righteousness. The problem is that myself and the rest of humanity are all sinners and are guilty for breaking God's law, which the Bible makes clear was written on our hearts. We all have a conscience. Ask yourself with me truthfully and honestly, what if? What if the definition of pretending is to deceive or give a false appearance? What if pretending can fool men but can't fool God? What if it's true that we're all known by our fruits? What if Jesus was right in saying that not everyone who calls Him their Lord will enter into heaven? What if Satan wants me to believe that I can sin and get away with it? What if God is not only a God of love and forgiveness, but also a God of justice and wrath? What if it's true that it's a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God, like it says in Hebrews chapter 10, verse 31? What if my love for the things of this world reveals that I do not belong to Christ? What if I really should examine myself to see if I'm truly in the faith? What if I have not been honest and been brokenhearted over my sins against God and completely surrendered to the Lordship of Jesus Christ? What if I've broken God's laws and commandments thousands of times without even caring that it spits in the face of God? What if God holds me accountable for every lie, every lustful thought, every time I felt hatred towards someone? What if God considers my lust to be adultery and hatred to be murder? What if I'm actually ignoring the God who gives me my every breath? What if I don't see myself as an enemy of God who deserves nothing but an eternity in hell? What if God does not desire for me to go to hell and made a way for me to be forgiven? What if God took my punishment by dying on the cross in the person of Jesus Christ for my sins? What if this conviction in my heart is begging me to truly repent and put my faith in Jesus Christ alone to save me?